Welcome to the Day with Friday. My name is Michael Olschimke. I'm the CEO of Scalefree. We run this session here every Friday, as you most probably know already, every time at 11 o'clock in the morning, Central European Standard Time. And yeah, we run a session to allow you, the audience, to ask questions about Data Vault, any data-driven question, cloud questions, anything data relevant is perfect. And yeah, so we received questions, so let me just share my screen. And yeah, you can use the Q&A here in the chat, well, in the tool. You can use the chat if you want. If you want to raise live questions, I'm used to that, right? So because we do the trainings and we get a lot of questions all the time, so it's live questions during the training. So if you have any question, just shoot them, to be honest. That's all good. However, we also have a question from that was submitted to us. So let me just share my screen here. So this one here is essentially from the training. Essentially, let me just show you this slide first before I go back, essentially. So this one is slide 29 or 28 from the training, where essentially the data flow, let's say architecture, is presented here. And we see some pit tables here, pits and bridges down here, and business pits and bridges up here. And the next, so that's question number one. And question number two is, why is the pit part of the logical information mart somehow here, right? So this border line, this line here, this border, essentially includes the information marts and the pits down here. Let me just go back to the questions. What's the difference between the business data vault pits and bridges and the pits and bridges down at the bottom? And why is the business vault information mart are put into one logical wrapper? Why does physical and logical wrapper differentiate? Right, so here's the thing. In the training, in the Data Vault 2.0 training that we conduct, the thing is that the slides, or most of the slides, are presenting a logical perspective. And logically, you need the pit and bridge tables to deliver information, same as the business vault. Without the business vault, without the pit and bridge tables, you can't really deliver information, except if your data would be good enough for reporting. If you just have clean data, you don't need to transform anything, everything is fine. In theory, this case might exist, right? But most clients, including us internally, we don't have this luxury, to be honest. So we need business vault entities and pit and bridge tables to deliver information. Pit and bridge tables here serve performance, right? So that's why logically they are part of the information delivery. That's number one. So it's really part of the information delivery that delivers the information at the end. So a bit of confusing is here sometimes the mix of information and information delivery. To make it a bit more clear, I would call this essentially, yeah, I would essentially name this a bit differently, to be honest. Information delivery results in an information mart, essentially. And to produce this information mart, you need these pit and bridge tables during the information delivery. That's what how I would phrase it. So that's number one. So that explains the boundary, because you're right. Physically, when you implement pit and bridge tables physically, they are part of the business vault, and that's where you want to place them. And the business vault is closely arranged to the raw data vault, because when you produce your dimensions or facts in the information mart, you're going to join raw data vault entities with business vault entities with PAT and bridge tables, right? So because that's the end result. But that's a physical presentation, or physical perspective, or physical model. So so there's a difference here between the physical presentation and the logical presentation. That's number one. That explains question number two. The first question: why do we have different pits here, pits down here, and business pits and bridges here? Is quite simple. Those pit tables down here are also part of the business vault, but they don't implement any business logic. So for example, in the pit table, you can just apply, you perform these left outer joins with the complex join condition, where you look for the delta where hash keys match between hub and satellite, and where the snapshot data you want to load is between the load date of the delta and the virtual load end date, for example. And that's what we call a technical or standard pit, as it's called. So you just apply the technical historization. But then we also know the T pits, temporal pits, where you could apply a business timeline in the loading process of the pit table. Or the Q pit, body cleansing pit, where you just activate any delta you want, maybe a ghost record, maybe a delta of a different parent, in your index. And but that's also where you need to apply business logic. So the question is, or the difference is, do you apply business logic in the loading process of your pits and bridge tables? And that differentiates it here. So those pits and bridges here are very technical, especially pit tables. You can actually load very technically. Bridge tables, I mean, you can argue the grain shift. If it's just the grain shift you're implementing, you can actually automate these bridge tables. As soon as you start adding computed columns, let's say compute measure values, cleansing, and what else, in this case, you essentially, the problem is that it's not a red line. It's really fuzzy a bit when you switch from this just pure grain shift over here to the bridge table, because you could also argue the grain shift is already a business rule and so on. So it's a bit fuzzy in my opinion on the bridge table. I would say I would really distinguish here between automation. Can you fully automate this without much definition, let's say? And then in this case, you would place it here. Now, the thing is, from our project experience, it's more a theoretical question, because the thing is, in the book, we have 3 PRT tables, for example. We have the standard pit, where we only apply the technical historization. We have the temporal pit, where we apply a business timeline for multi-temporal solutions. And we have the Q pit, where we just where we just put some delta somewhere in the index, or activate some delta somewhere in the index. Fine. We have 3 tables for that. In reality, we don't do that anymore. So for years already. What we typically do is we create 1 pit table, which is partitioned by the snapshot date, as usual, right? But also partitioned by a type code. And the type code is either pit, T-pit, Q-pit, T-pit 2, T-pit 3, and so on. So you can have multiple pit tables in 1 table partitioned, but then you just need to apply the filter, the where condition on the type code whenever you produce a dimension or whatever, right? Or leave it to the end user in the dashboard, where you produce a dimension, a filter dimension on this type code. So users can switch in the dashboard from one perspective to the next, from one temporal perspective, let's say on the valid from valid to date, to the next temporal perspective, I don't know, subscription start end date, to the technical historization, or to a Q-pit, to anything, right? People love it. Users just love it, and that's why we essentially have only 1 pit. And then, I mean, it's classified up here because these partitions, some of them, well, one of them is technically typically, but the rest is loaded with business rules in mind. That's the basic idea. Internally, you know what? You have 1 more second here, because let me just give me 1 second. I'll show you the pit table. Why not? So, but that's the answer here. Yeah, we typically have only 1 table in that sense, but logically different partitions in the table. Here's the structure. So we have the pit table I can show, yeah. So we have the type code is just pit, which means it's a standard pit table. We don't apply temporal timelines here at Scalefree internally. And then we have the hash key, which is the primary key in the pit table that's calculated from typically the business key behind the hash key. I mean, this is your alternate key, hash key, and the snapshot date, typically. That gives you a unique identifier. And then the dimension hash key is calculated from the business key behind this hash key and the snapshot date. That's what we typically teach. And then with the type code in place, you extend the alternate key by the type code. So your alternate key is now the hash key, the snapshot date, and the type code. And then the hash key for your dimension is calculated from all 3. That's the basic idea, because that must be unique per row, right? Yeah, that's our pit structure. And then you can add just multiple pit partitions in here and have it filter dimension where users can filter for the right pit table essentially. And that's a nice thing, because now they can switch perspectives from different timelines and so on. That's the idea. Right. So that should answer it. Okay, cool. But good question. Yeah, if you have a question like this, and maybe you trigger my date where I want to show off our data was, right? Use this form here, sfr.ee/dvfriday. That gives you a form where you can essentially type in your question, maybe upload a picture like these guys here. Upload a picture from your whiteboard, maybe a team picture, I don't know. And that's number one. The other thing is we do run other webinars too. So there's a monthly webinar on DBT and on RESC at the moment. And those are essentially driven by our consultants, where they are experts in the field in these tools. And that's where you find, that's the URL where you can essentially log in for, sign up for these webinars too. So yeah, check them out. It's really, it's also a growing audience, essentially. It's really nice. And last but not least, again, a short pitch for the Data Dreamland conference coming up in October, on October 10th and 11th in Hanover. So 2 days packed with, a lot of customer presentations. Scott Ambler will be there, and it will be really nice. So yeah, if you can make it, it would be nice to see you in person and shake hands, right? Yeah, looking forward for it. All right, so I think we're done. Thank you, guys. See you hopefully next time, and next Friday, and wish you a nice weekend, guys. Thank you. All right.
Thanks for joining today. If you'd like to discuss this further, give us a call on the number below here, and we're happy to discuss this with you. See you next time. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.